Hey everyone, Happy New Year! Yay! We have finally gotten through 2020. If you haven't already, post your New Year's resolutions in the comment section below, or tweet them to me. That way you can come back to this video a few days later and realize how miserably you failed. Anyway, what shall we talk about today? Although I said I was going to make a part 2 to the possum, I never intended to. But the voice of the people on Twitter must be heard. If you haven't followed me there, then please do so. There's been a vaccine video that I've been holding on to for over a month now, so we'll be releasing that next week no matter what happens. No more. This is the last time I'm responding to this guy. Lots of other fish in the sea. Except bad fish, you know. Then the next week after, we'll do a creationism video. Alright, let's begin. Continuing on where we left off. Now, this next part, he plays a relatively long portion of my video. I'm going to skip it since it's not really new content, and you can find it in the original video anyway. Basically, it's a short lesson on why exposing yourself to other pathogens is not going to help you much against COVID-19. In general, your adaptive immune response is specific to what it fights and what it fought. It's nothing groundbreaking, and the concept is very simple. Let's see what he has to say.
Alright, so a couple things to say here. First of all, this was kind of an information dump. He was kind of throwing out all these technical concepts while speaking quickly. Oftentimes when someone is a professional in a particular field, they're used to working around other professionals in that field. They're used to explaining things using all sorts of technical jargon. This is why a lot of times people who are really smart about a particular subject will have difficulty explaining it in a way that makes sense to a layperson.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. I do speak fast, and that's just what I do when speaking into a microphone sometimes. But the concept is not something you need a degree in biology to understand. Honestly, it's high school level science. If you've taken biology in high school at all, you would have learned about the immune system at least to the level that I just explained. The stuff we deal with in laboratories and such are concepts much more complicated that I wouldn't even try to explain it to a layperson. I've made plenty of other videos where the level exceeds high school or even undergraduate college level biology, but this is not one of them. It's fine if any of you don't understand it though. I didn't mean to be rude, so I do apologize if it came off that way. I'll simplify it a bit further so everyone can understand. Your immune system can be divided into two different types of responses. The innate immune response is non-specific and fast-acting, while the adaptive immune response is slow but strong. When you fight an infection, ultimately it's going to be the adaptive immune response that eliminates the pathogen, but since it is slow to build up, you will suffer the symptoms before you get better. However, that is not the case for pathogens that you have already fought before, because your adaptive immune response has a memory system where the cells that fought the pathogen stick around a bit. That way, if you see the same infection again, you can have an instant adaptive response, which would eliminate the disease before you experience symptoms. However, this adaptive immune response is specific to what it fought before, which means exposing yourself to other non-related pathogens will not help in combating a novel virus. I hope that made it more clear.
Now, as an IT professional, I'm often finding myself in situations where I have to work with or help people who may not know a whole lot about computers. So I do understand the difficulty of needing to explain technical concepts in a way that a layperson can understand. It can be tricky sometimes, so this I do kind of understand.
We probably understand each other a lot more than either of us would like to admit, since I do a bit of IT stuff in my job as well. And boy, helping someone who has no computer knowledge and don't even know what Google Chrome is can be a massive pain sometimes.
But what he was basically saying there was that exposing your immune system to a variety of pathogens doesn't necessarily better equip your immune system to deal with COVID-19 specifically. So this guy's an expert in biology and immunology. I'm not, so I'm going to have to kind of take his word on this. But even if it's not necessarily the case that exposing yourself to pathogens in general better prepares your body to deal with COVID-19, maybe the idea is that exposing yourself to COVID-19 makes your immune system better at fighting COVID-19.
Yes, that is certainly the case. If your body has fought COVID-19 before, it should develop the memory cells to have a quick adaptive response the next time around. That's the entire concept of vaccinations, where we inject you with the antigens of the pathogen, for example, which is just the surface proteins your immune system recognizes, and it will fight it by generating the cells that target specifically that disease. As an analogy, it's kind of like learning to sword fight by fighting a pillow dummy. But in the case of the immune system, you'd only be better equipped to fight people that are similar to the dummy. Once you fight a different person, maybe of different size or type than the dummy, then all you've learned is useless and you start back from square one. And of course, when enough people have developed an immunity to the pathogen, then herd immunity is achieved. You can obtain this in a population by either vaccinating enough people or enough people have to suffer through the infection first. Obviously, the first option is better because it would avoid the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people in the case of COVID, which is why it is important to take these precaution measures such as wearing a mask until enough people have been vaccinated. At this point in time, we have many vaccinations that have been approved already for emergency use, so it's not going to be too much longer. I predict it will be somewhere between April and July when regular people who aren't healthcare workers or high-risk individuals will get the vaccine. Until then, wear a mask. The severity of a disease is not only determined by the death rate. In fact, a higher death rate could very well mean less people die because it wouldn't be able to spread as far. That's why Ebola will never become a global pandemic.
It is true that deadlier diseases tend to spread more slowly because the people who catch them have less of an opportunity to spread them around. I've actually made this point in several of my previous videos I've done on COVID-19. So yeah, less deadly diseases tend to spread around quicker, that's true. However, since the disease is less deadly, wouldn't that also mean it's less of a problem if it spreads around?
For a novel virus that has an easy method of spreading, you can have one of two scenarios here. Either it's deadly and it doesn't spread as much, or it's less deadly and it spreads more. When you say, quote, since the disease is less deadly, wouldn't that mean it's less of a problem if it spreads around? It seems like you're saying it's better than a deadly disease that also spreads fast. In which case, that simply doesn't exist and won't exist in modern times, so it's simply useless to say it could be worse, when that worst scenario will never really happen. But anyway, I want to make 2 points to what you said. First of all, this disease may not have a very high death rate, but its risk is very high to certain groups of people. Individuals who are older in age or have pre-existing conditions will have a much greater risk. To them, it means so much for others to wear a mask. For younger people like us, the death rate is less than 1%. But let's say you're an older individual, say 80, where if you got the virus, your chances of dying skyrockets to 15%. Think about that. Not to mention, that would involve a long period of hospitalizations and ICU treatments. The story is very different depending on the individual. The second point I want to make is that you should look at the total deaths as well. Currently in the US, we have 350,000 deaths? To put that to scale, that is more than 2 times higher than US deaths in World War I, and we are creeping very close to World War II. Ultimately, the number of people this pandemic has killed says something, and we're constantly losing 2,000 to 4,000 people every day. What other man-made or natural event has killed and is killing this many people in just a year's worth of time? The only 2 types of diseases that really fit the category are coronaviruses and flus. That being said, comparing the seasonal flu with COVID-19 is not accurate. Comparing COVID to any existing pathogen is not accurate. The reason COVID is receiving so much attention is because we know nothing about it. At least we didn't know anything about it. By the time this video is uploaded, we already know quite a bit, but in the context of when Dr. Erickson made these statements, we knew nothing.
So on the one hand, you're saying that coronavirus is not in any way comparable to the flu, and on the other hand, you're saying that coronavirus has properties in common with the flu.
In the context of what I said there, I'm talking specifically about deadliness. You can't compare COVID with the flu in that regard. I just see so many people do that and it's just too ridiculous. Now, if you want to compare symptoms, that's another story. And of course, you can do some sort of comparison there since they're both respiratory viruses. Nothing is contradictory in what I said.
I mean, we're always being told we need to listen to the experts and listen to the science. Well, my problem with that is that to a significant extent, the experts in science you want us to listen to keep giving us mixed messages.
The only mixed messages that the scientific community would give us is if new information comes up that corrects something previously claimed. Now, of course, that can be frustrating to many people. I get it that you want to know the absolute truth of it all before we had time to analyze the virus itself. However, that can never be the case. When scientists give advice on a certain subject that is the best we know based on our current understanding of the pandemic, it is still the best interpretation. And of course, what we know will constantly evolve as more research is being done, but we can never predict what new things we will discover, so the best course of action is still to listen to what scientists have to say. That being said, science is not represented by a single individual. It is a collection of all the scientists in the world. So of course, here and there you will find some crazy people like Dr. Erickson here who spreads nothing but nonsense on social media. But when something like this goes viral, you usually see multiple other scientists speaking out against that person. Since you asked for links about scientists disagreeing with Dr. Erickson, I did put a few sources in my previous video's description, so feel free to check that out. Anyway, back to the topic of mixed messages, you have to learn to pick out the most reliable sources. For example, the CDC. You can't just always listen to a random podcast on YouTube and think these people know what they're talking about. At least check their credentials first. The reason I mentioned this specifically is because in the sources of your video, you linked 2 YouTube videos. Those are not sources. Sources for scientific claims must come from scientific papers, primary articles published in well-established journals, for example.
On the one hand, we're being told that COVID-19 is this brand new disease that is totally new to us and that we know nothing about. And on the other hand, we're being told that COVID-19 is similar to a lot of other viruses we already know about, like SARS.
In the beginning, when we say we know nothing about them, that doesn't mean we know absolutely nothing. We obviously know some things like it's a virus, how it attacks our cells, its mechanisms on reproduction, the symptoms it gives us, etc. Those are obvious. What we don't know are the smaller details that vary between pathogens. Things like exactly how it spreads, how infectious it is, long-term damage, what antivirals work against it, how to properly treat the patient, things like that. Obviously, the things that scientists do know, they'll share. It's as simple as that. Also, regarding your statement of COVID being similar to SARS, that's because it's literally a strain of SARS. We know that. We've sequenced the DNA and ran an alignment. Increasing cortisol levels does negatively impact immune activity through the psychoneuroimmune system pathway. That part is correct. However, there is a huge leap of logic when claiming that wearing masks cause increased cortisol levels. First, you'd be assuming that masks give people anxiety, which realistically is a bad assumption. I don't know anyone who becomes anxious just because of a thin piece of fabric covering their mouths.
Well, sure, having to wear a piece of cloth over your face in and of itself probably isn't going to cause much anxiety. However, there are other things out there that do in fact cause anxiety, and those things combined with the mask are ultimately is going to cause problems.
If you're implying that masks combined with a variety of other issues could cause anxiety, then maybe it's the other issues that you need to look at, not masks. Second, cortisol is the result of more long-term stressors, which is also simply not the case here.
Long-term stressors, so you mean like taking away people's sources of income? Being told that if you go and hang out with your friends, you could be potentially killing vast numbers of people? Those sound like long-term stressors to me.
Okay, sure, but we're talking about face masks here. If you want to argue about lockdowns or other types of social distancing, such as not hanging out in large groups, then that's an entirely separate discussion. There's plenty of debate over there on what should be enforced, but that's different than wearing a simple mask over your face.
You're creating actually an increase in respiratory drive because you get more carbon dioxide coming back from the face mask.
Yes, respiratory rate may increase, but it's not going to be an issue unless you have pre-existing breathing conditions.
Yeah, and people with pre-existing breathing conditions don't need to do things like go to the grocery store or go out in public at all.
I've mentioned this in a previous video. If you have pre-existing breathing conditions or have a legit reason not to wear a mask, such as a phobia of suffocation or panic attacks, then yeah, I'm sure everyone can agree you are exempt from wearing a mask. But if you have an illegitimate reason, such as it infringes upon my personal liberties, then absolutely not. Alright, I think we've gone on long enough. There's still a lot of video left, but I don't think there's any way I'm making a part 3. Unless this video gets like 50,000 views in a week or something. I doubt that will happen. Anyway, thanks for watching, and thank you to my patrons Fireshard, Alan Morton, JN, and Miss Fixit for the support. See you next week.